Hi everyone, thank you for joining. We're going to wait a couple of minutes for more people to join and then we will kick off. So thanks for your patience. Okay, I think in the interest of time, we will get started. So hi everyone, happy Friday. Thank you for joining today's session, which is the 8th in this series of workshops, which is hosted by Social Impact Hub with support from Westpac Foundation and Paul Ramsey Foundation. Before we start, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today. For me, that's the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, as well as extending this more broadly, acknowledging that we're collectively dialing in from a range of locations today. So my name is Rob, and alongside my colleague Jess, who's on the call today, and the broader team at Social Impact Hub, it's been a real privilege bringing this series of workshops together for you. And we've had some great conversations as we're kind of reaching out and trying to build that collaboration across the sector. So thanks for being a part of this. Just before we dive in and I hand over to Rachel, our today's facilitator, just a few pieces of housekeeping. Just whilst we're going through the session, please keep yourself on mute. Feel free to use the chat function just to share any comments or questions. We want to try and make the session as interactive as possible today. And if you can, please keep your camera on to the extent you're able to, just so we can try and interact, meeting some new people, and build that collaborative nature of today's session. So any technical issues with sound or audio connections, please just send a private message to myself or Jess. We'll do our best to help you. The session is also being recorded, so you'll have access to it after today's session. That's everything from my side. So pleasure to introduce you to Rachel Findlay, who's going to take you through today's session on theory of change. Over to you, Rachel, and thank you.
Thanks, Rob. So as Rob said, I'm Rachel Findlay, and I'll be running today's session on Introduction to Theory of Change. It's great to see so many people on the call. By way of introduction, I have been working in the non-profit sector for over 10 years, originally in the UK, for an organisation called New Philanthropy Capital, who are kind of leading the sector in the UK around impact measurement and evaluation. And now obviously in Australia, I've been working at Social Ventures Australia, and now I'm one of the consultants at the Social Impact Hub. So really excited to see so many people on this call. And yeah, as Rob said, please do use the chat function if there's any problems or if you've got any questions at all. So in terms of today's session, very much an introduction to theory of change. So we'll be covering what is a theory of change, what goes into a theory of change, what do they look like. I'll be showing you some examples of theories of change that we've done at the Hub. And then you'll have an opportunity to actually start developing your own theory of change, either from the organisation that you're representing today, or if you're not working for a social enterprise or a non-profit, then you're welcome to pick your own, your favourite, and actually we'll actually start documenting one and developing one together. So very practical session. There will be opportunities to interact, and we'll be using breakout groups. So yeah, we'll kick off. Oh, sorry. So as Rob said, if you could possibly put your microphones on mute, just so we don't get any background noise. Please use the chat function if you have any questions. And for my benefit, it's great when people have their camera on, so I can see if you're looking really interested and engaged, or slightly confused, or just really bored. So please feel free to use your camera just so we get some feedback from you guys. In terms of today's agenda, so we're going to kick off. We'll be going into small breakout groups in a minute. We'll be doing some intros. And then we'll kick off with what is a theory of change. I'll walk you through some examples. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we'll start developing your own theory of change. And that's where we'll spend the majority of the time today. So I just want to take 5 minutes. We'll go into small breakouts. I think Zoom is amazing. We were just saying earlier before this call, like Zoom has been a great introduction to our lives in terms of accessibility of material and saving in travel time, but it's just really sad not to meet people. So we're going to kick off with a short breakout session, introducing yourselves. So if you could possibly say your name, the organization that you're coming from, that you work for, your experience with theory of change, and then what you hope to get from today's session. So for me, obviously my name is Rachel. I work for the Social Impact Hub. In terms of my experience with theory of change, I actually came across theory of change about 12 years ago. I was working for an economist who was a big fan of theory of change, and I think at that stage kind of quite a pioneering approach. He really sold me theory of change and its benefits. And in terms of what I hope to get from today, I really want to give you guys some tools that enable you to go away, go back to your own organizations, and actually develop your own theory of change. So I'm going to hand over to you guys. Jess is going to put you in breakout groups of 3 to 4 people for 5 minutes, and then we will reconvene as a group. Hi everyone, welcome back. I hope you had some good discussions and good introductions in your breakout groups. We'll go back into breakout groups throughout this next hour and a half, and you'll be in the same breakout group. So hopefully you'll really get to know the people and the organizations that they represent. So you should see some familiar faces in about 10 minutes. Now I'm just going to go through the kind of the intro bit in terms of what is a theory of change, what goes into a theory of change, and why bother? Why do we do a theory of change? So a theory of change maps out the missing middle between what a program does or what an organization does, the activities, and how these lead to a desired goal, i.e. the outcomes. And it does this by identifying the long-term goals and then working backwards to work out the steps that must be in place for the goals to occur. So for me, I always think about it very visually. It's a single page that kind of lies all the activities and your end impact and maps out the logic for how you get from the things you do to what it is that you want to achieve. In terms of what goes into a theory of change, there are 5 key elements. The first is the inputs, i.e. what resources are you going to use to pursue your program goals? And that's often around finance, human capital, intellectual capital, etc. The next is activities, i.e. what activities will you do? What programs will you run as part of your organization to achieve your goals? And I think this can sometimes be tricky in terms of deciding at what level do you define your activity, because they need to be meaningful, but you don't want to have hundreds of activities. So I think it's about brainstorming the activities, kind of grouping them up and bringing them to kind of programmatic level descriptions of what your organization does. The next is outputs. And so what is it you're actually going to produce and deliver as part of your activities? And then outcomes, which is about the changes, the result from your activities. And then finally, impact, i.e. the end goal, like the longer term achievement of what it is, of what it is that your organization will achieve. Ideally, it is a single page visual diagram. And I think the reason for that is that it's a great communication tool, as we'll come on to now. So simplicity, I think, is always the key. You see some theories of change which are huge and complex, but for me, a really good theory of change is a single page diagram which clearly articulates what your organization does and what it wants to achieve. So why do we do a theory of change? I think there's 4 things. The first, as I just said, is a really powerful communication tool and a simple summary of the change you want to see. So I always really like it when I look at an organization and they have a theory of change, because I think it really clearly articulates what the organization does in a 1-page visual way. The second is the reason I think a lot of people do a theory of change, which is about measurement. So a theory of change can be used to help you identify what it is you want to achieve and hence work out what it is you need to measure. The third is it can help you to discover insights to improve the program. And so an example of that would be sometimes when you're doing a theory of change, you realize you've got a set of activities and a set of outcomes, and actually maybe some of the activities you're doing aren't actually directly enabling you to achieve those outcomes. So maybe there's activities that you're doing that don't really clearly deliver impact. And then the other side of that is sometimes you realize there are outcomes that you want to achieve, but you're not actually delivering any services to enable you to achieve those outcomes. So it can help you to really review what it is you're doing and whether your activities make sense in terms of what it is you want to achieve. And then finally, it can help to generate an agreement amongst stakeholders on what it is that you're all working towards. I've run a few theory of change sessions with organizations that can't actually agree on what the end goal is. So I think it's that sometimes, the theory of change, it's about the journey, not just the outcome, the actual final theory of change. But I think the process of developing a theory of change can be a really powerful tool in terms of getting all stakeholders on the same page about what is it that our organization wants to achieve in the world. So there are so many examples out there, and I think this can often be quite overwhelming in terms of what should our theory of change look like. So I just wanted to show you a few, because I think there's a few different ways you can present a theory of change, and depending on why you're doing it, you might want to present your theory of change differently. So this is just a quick view on how different organizations do their theory of change. There is no, in my mind, right or wrong answer in terms of how you present your theory of change. There's lots of different ways. There's loads of really creative and beautiful ways to do it. However, I think this kind of page where you have the kind of descriptor of stakeholders, activities, outputs, outcomes, goal is kind of the most traditional way of doing a theory of change. And this is the approach that we're going to use today with you. And so this example on the page is for an organization called the Bread and Butter Project, which is a social enterprise bakery that trains and employs refugees and asylum seekers. So what they've got on the left is all the different stakeholders that their organization is working with, quite a long list of activities, and then several ultimate goals. And we will share these slides after with you so that you can read through them in detail. But I think this is kind of often the first cut of a theory of change, and this is where we will try to get to today. This is a great synthesized view of the first page. I think the first page is great as a kind of a working document, but slightly too lengthy and maybe slightly too in detail to share externally and with stakeholders. So this synthesizes the first page by using the headings if we, and then by, which is obviously the activities, it will deliver these outputs, leading to these outcomes, and then the end goal. And so again, feel free to read through this in your own time, but this is something that maybe you guys could work towards after today's session. A rather really nice visual, I think, which is quite nicely documented and really clear, is this golden thread diagram. And this theory of change here is actually for the RISE program. So the RISE program is actually the reason we're all here today. This is the program that's funded by the Westpac Foundation and Paul Ramsey Foundation regarding helping social enterprises who have been affected by COVID. And so the key here is very same headings, stakeholders, inputs, activities, outcomes, and program outcomes and impact. But it has three key things at each stage. So it really forces you to summarize your detailed theory of change. So I quite like using this after a workshopping session where we've got that really detailed page. And this really forces you to think up a level. And it's a great tool for communication. And then finally, this is a really nice verbal way of writing a theory of change, which is quite a nice narrative. So again, it just works off the previous slide. This one again is for the RISE program, and it just uses the three headings. If we do X by doing Y, we can achieve Z. So this is quite a nice narrative, rather than having, if you're not a visual person or your stakeholders and audience aren't visual people, this is quite a nice narrative to use to verbally explain your theory of change. So obviously lots of different ways to present your theory of change. I think the first one is where most people start. And then I think it's about reviewing why you're doing a theory of change and working out which tool and diagram works for your organization. So now we're going to move on to developing your own theory of change. So I think the majority of people that are on this call now either work for a social enterprise or a non-profit, in which case I think it's great to use your own organization to start to write your own theory of change today. And the reason for that is I think, obviously we're all taking an hour and a half away from our day. And so it's great to actually have something concrete to share at the end of it. There'll be opportunities to share ideas with other people and get feedback from other people in the breakout group. So I think that's quite a unique opportunity to get an external perspective on your own theory of change. If, however, you're here today and you don't work for a social enterprise or a non-profit, please just feel free to pick your favourite organisation that you know, your favourite social enterprise, or your favourite charity, and use that one. Or, if you want to be really helpful, then one of the lovely people you met in the introductory breakout group, help them with theirs. So this is just a quick recap. These are the ingredients of your theory of change. Today, we're going to focus on the right-hand side. So we always recommend starting with impact and working backwards. And due to the time today, we'll go through impact and outputs and outcomes. And then I think activities was probably the more straightforward, and inputs. And so we will leave you to do that in your own time after today's session. But if we're starting with impact, in terms of what do we mean by impact? Impact. So a great definition, and my favorite definition of impact, is from the Centre for Social Impact. And they define impact as the longer term social, economic, and or environmental outcomes of a programme. Here, I just want to flick back to the Bread and Butter project. They had two ultimate goals. I think the dream is to try and articulate the ultimate goal, the impact, as one, but theirs was breaking the cycle, breaking the disadvantage cycle to enable positive futures and a more inclusive world for refugees. So what we're going to do is I'm going to give you 3 minutes just to brainstorm by yourself what the impact of your organisation is. And I think there's a few ways to think through this. One is, what's the change you want to see in the world? The other one is, imagine in 100 years' time, when your organisation is no longer around, what's inscribed on the headstone of your organisation, i.e. this organisation was known to do X. And this is thinking big. It's thinking long term. So, at least over 5 years, think BHAG. What is your big, hairy, audacious goal? So I'm going to kick off, going to give you guys 3 minutes. So what will happen is there'll be some music for 3 minutes, and then we'll all come back together. And then the next step will be that we're going to move into a breakout. We'll give you 7 to 10 minutes in that breakout to share the impact that you've documented for your organisation, give you an opportunity to comment and provide feedback to each other, and then we'll share a few with the wider audience when we come back. So the first step is we're going to put some music on for 3 minutes, and then we'll all come back together before the breakout. Jess, you all right to do the music?
Yeah, Rachel, do you want to pop in the questions in the chat?
Oh yeah, hang on. I'm just going to quickly open the chat function. Oh, sorry. Here we go. Will we have access? Yes, we'll share the presentation after today's session. This is a really good question. Is a theory of change at a programme or an organisational level too? I think both. I think the dream is that you have a one-pager that articulates a theory of change to the organisation, and then you can have programmatic theories of change that sit below that. For some organisations, it can be really tricky to do that organisation-wide theory of change in a meaningful way. If you're an organisation that runs really vastly different programmes, so we did a theory of change for a community centre, and they are running programmes with every demographic, every age, every social issue. And so it was really hard to come up with one theory of change, but the dream is try and come up with one theory of change for your organisation. If that is really tricky, then let's start at the programme level. So I think for today, let's try and do it at your organisation-wide level. And then I think that was it. Before we go into breakouts, if anyone else has any other questions, pop them in the text box, in the chat box.
Rach, could you just quickly recap on the questions that we need to answer in the?
Yep. We're just literally going to go away, and for your organisation, spend 3 minutes coming up with that very far right-hand side. What is the impact that your organisation wants to create? So you can either, I think for me, there's 3 ways of thinking about that. They're not kind of 3 different questions, but just 3 ways of considering the problem. It's the change you want to make. It's what's your organisation going to be known for, ending poverty. Or it's like your big hairy goal that you're trying to create today. So just come up with 1 or 2 impact statements for your organisation. Jess, are you all right to?
Yep. Music.
Yes, please. Great, thanks everyone. It's nice to see everyone's looks of concentration as they're typing and writing away. What we're going to do now is we're going to go into breakout groups, and I'm going to give 10 minutes. I think there's about 3 to 4 people in each breakout group. So it gives everyone a couple of minutes to talk through the impact that they've documented for their organisation with a quick overview of their organisation if you didn't cover that in the introduction. And then it gives an opportunity for other people to feedback and reflect and provide any suggestions. So if everyone can just be aware of time in the breakout, there'll be 10 minutes, and it'd be great, sorry, if everyone gets a chance to talk about the impact. And then when we come back, it'd be great if you could pick 1 or 2 organisations or just one to share with the broader group, and just talk about the impact that you've got for that organisation. So to recap, each go through your impact, provide feedback, and then pick 1 or 2 people to speak back in the main forum about the impact that they've documented. And again, we're on the chat function, so any questions, feel free to yell. Otherwise, we will regroup in 10 minutes.
Okay,
Hi
so
everyone.
it's coming back now.
I think everyone is back. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you all had a good discussion in your breakout rooms. I know it's not quite the same as meeting face to face, but hopefully you were able to support each other and thinking through impact. I thought it'd be nice to just spend a few minutes sharing what people documented as their impact, but 2, any thoughts or comments people had on the on how difficult or how easy it is to define impact, or any questions people might have. So I'm going to try and go through the breakout rooms and go by them in turn, and then if either 1 or 2 people want to speak from that breakout room to share their thoughts and their impact, that would be great. So room 1, does anyone from room 1 want to share their impact from their organisation?
Was I in room 1, Rachel? Not really sure.
Yes.
What room. Yeah, okay. So I've been the lucky nominated person to share on behalf of our group. I work for I'll tell you the impact first, and then maybe you can guess which organisation it is. So impact would be empowering humanity to help each other in times of need.
Great. Does anyone want to guess which organisation Belinda works for?
Red Cross.
Well done, whoever guessed that.
Well done. And any thoughts on the process, Belinda? Is that something that came very quickly to you, or is it something you had to think about? Did anyone provide any good feedback for you in the room?
I got good feedback. So I think I originally had, I can't actually remember what I originally had, but it was something more along the lines of helping or facilitating communities to help each other in times of need. And I think Lara from Hume suggested, why don't you incorporate your slogan that we all know about empowering humanity? So that was a good piece of feedback.
Yeah, really nice. Thank you, Belinda. Was anyone else in your room? Does anyone else in your room want to speak, or should we move on to room 2? Were you the nominated spokesperson, Belinda?
I was.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so anyone from room 2, anyone want to share their impact in the organisation they're from room 2?
We didn't really have a nominated spokesperson for room 2, but I might just talk about what my impact statement was. So I work in the insurance program at Good Shepherd Australia and New Zealand, and the impact that I statement that I had was to break the intergenerational cycle of disadvantage by providing people on low incomes with access to affordable, accessible insurance products that they can understand and trust.
Great, thank you. Did anyone, was that, again, sort of same question as to Belinda, how difficult was that for you to define, and did anyone provide any feedback in the room?
Well, this is something that we had kind of been working to hone for a little while. So that was, it wasn't as tough as maybe it would have been, but yeah, we didn't have much feedback, for, any negative or, it was positive feedback.
Great, thank you. Room 3, does anyone want to share their impact?
I'm not
Hello?
actually sure what room I was. Sorry, Rachel. I don't
That's
know.
all right. Go for it, Fiona. Do you want to go for?
Was I in room 3?
I think you're in room 4, but I think your enthusiasm, you should go for it now.
Sorry.
That's all right. It's tricky to remember. It flashes up so quickly, doesn't it?
No.
Yeah, Fiona, do you want to share your impacts in the organisation you work for?
It's my fear of that awkward silence, I think.
Exactly. You saved me. Thank you.
For your sake.
Yeah.
Never mind. So I work for a disability support provider and a regional sports assembly, and it's probably I wouldn't mind discussing further the difference between having a theory of change for saying my internet connection is unstable, but I'm hoping you can still all hear me. That for the organisation as opposed to the program that I'm developing, which is a diversity and inclusion plan. But the impact statement that I really liked, the headstone idea, that creating an organisation that values difference and is inclusive of all people.
That's great. Thank you, Fiona. And was that, I guess I sense that, is there a challenge there around differentiating the program impact and the organisation whole impact? Was that tricky?
It's probably just for me, I've got sitting in front of me our strategic plan, and I'm constantly thinking, where does this sit within that overall strategic plan? But there's spots where I know that it's going to be intertwined. But at this stage, for me, that I think that will keep me really focused on the work that I'm going to be doing in getting the stakeholder involvement and working through the process of developing the plan of what we're going to be doing. Yeah, I won't take over, but yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Fiona. I think it is always I think it is, in some organisations it's very straightforward, that organisation-wide theory of change, and in others it's much more tricky to differentiate to bring lots of different programs together at that top level. Anyone from room 3, so that's Lisa, Michelle, Rebecca or Simon, do you guys want to share from one of your organisations?
Hello?
Hello, Simon.
Yes, I'm a PhD student from the University of Western Sydney, and the goal, which I believe we've achieved, is the furtherance of knowledge about the world and learning more about experiences of different people. So specifically, this goal has already been achieved, but it's quite important. It was quite a process, and it was to reform the PhD system. So the bar has been set higher, but as I'm suggesting, the process which was put into place some time ago has actually been achieved. So yeah, there should be more resources.
Thank you, Simon. And was it difficult for you to come up with that impact statement, or was that something that was quite straightforward?
Yeah, it was quite, took a lot of years. Yeah, and it continues to take years. I think it will take some time, but the changes we see will be gradual. But as I said, they're already being happening because of pioneers in the furtherance of knowledge and ideas.
Right. Thank you, Simon.
And also, it's interesting in relation to the media, how understanding how the media works makes it useful when talking about PhD programs, because we're seeing more people from the different schools of journalism enrolling in university life, and it's cross-pollination. But as I said in my discussion of the impact statement, the goals have already been.
Right. Thank you, Simon. It's interesting to hear from someone who feels that they've already achieved their own impact as well. So I think it's quite nice. So thank you everyone for sharing your impact and for learning. It's always great to hear a little bit more about different organisations that are out there in the sector. So thank you, everyone. What we're going to do now is we're going to move on, like kind of move backwards in the theory of change to thinking about outputs and outcomes. And this is like the real kind of brainstorming, post-it notes all around your room, or actually at Social Impact Hub, we really like to use the technology called Miro, M-I-R-O. I'd never come across Miro before the hub, and it's basically like an electronic post-it noting session. So yeah, that can be useful to try out too. So what we're going to do is we're going to be working back from impact by ourselves again, initially brainstorming outputs and outcomes, and then we'll go into breakout groups. But before we do, I just wanted to share, I think this is something, the difference between outputs and outcomes. And I know quite often this is a question that's asked. So outputs. So an output is a direct deliverable. So such as the number of people served or the number of workshops you run. I've provided a couple of examples here. So an output could be the number of people accessing mental health daycare service, or the number of people gaining employment. So it's a tangible deliverable as a result of your activity. Whereas an outcome is more around the change. So it's a change in your target group. So examples include the improvement in the health and well-being of people using in service, or something like increased self-esteem. It's about the changes in your participants, whereas an output is a tangible deliverable. So what we kind of do in this outputs outcomes brainstorming session is, if we were all in real life, you know, we give everyone in the room, often it's done as a workshop, post-it notes, and this frantic activity around sticking 1 million post-it notes on the wall. And actually, I would recommend after today that this is something you could take away to the organisations that you work for and that you represent. It's a great activity. Get the stakeholders in the room and get everyone to do this together. But for today, what we will do is we will do it by ourselves. So either just jot it down on a piece of paper, just think through as many outputs or outcomes that your activities that your organisation runs, what do they achieve? I just wanted to come back again to the bread and butter project as a kind of real life worked example. So outputs in the bread and butter project include refugees are trained, educational support programs are delivered, there are orders of bread and pastries, there is outreach on social media. They're kind of concrete deliverables that you can count often. Short-term outcomes are things like refugees are seen as role models, refugees feel proud, changes in perception and better understanding of refugees, etc. So if you guys could spend 3 minutes just by yourselves, again with Jess's nice music, writing down your outputs and outcomes. We will regroup and Jess will split you into breakout groups again for about 8 minutes this time to share your outputs and outcomes and help support each other again and reviewing them and refining them. And then we'll share some ideas again. So if Jess, could you put the music back on for 3 minutes? I'm just going to check. I can see there's some conversation in the chat.
There's a couple, Rach. So whether you want to do it after the breakout rooms or now, we have a question just asking, is there a difference between purpose and impact?
Yeah, we might come to that later. Are there any, if that's okay?
Around purpose and mission, is it the same as the impact statement?
Yeah. Okay, I think, is anyone, any specific questions on outputs and outcomes before we start?
No,
Yeah, I'll come back to that question around purpose, mission, impact statement in a minute. And I'll give you guys 3 minutes to think about outputs and outcomes, and then we'll come back together at the end to answer the questions, if that's okay. Jess, are you all right to set up the music? All right, everyone, I think that's 3 minutes. Obviously, this is a much longer, kind of a more involved task than thinking through one impact sort of sentence or statement. I think what we'll do now is we will go back into the breakout groups for 8 minutes, Jess. And if people could share some of their outputs and outcomes and get feedback again. I think it's very difficult because some people might have quite a lot of outputs and outcomes, but if you could sort of share a few that you have and then maybe ask any questions to the group about where you might be struggling or stuck, that would be great. So yeah, so the number one thing is, again, just sort of 2 minutes per organisation, per person. Share a couple of the outputs and outcomes that you've already identified. Ask for specific help if you're struggling on any part of this, in terms of what can the group give you. Use everyone's skills and expertise while you have them, and then we'll come back and we will regroup. And if you could nominate a spokesperson to just summarise the discussion in the room. So I don't think we need to go through an example for the organisation, just share how people are doing, where people are struggling, any interesting discussions that you had. Jess, you're right to start the breakout rooms again. Thank you.
Welcome back, everyone.
Welcome back, everyone. I think everyone is now back in the main room. So I hope, again, you had a good discussion in your breakout rooms. Just wanted to spend 10 minutes kind of sharing high level the discussion in the room, any interesting observations or comments. I'll go in reverse order this time. So anyone from room 4, so Alison, Cecily, Fiona or Sarah, does one of you want to speak about the discussion in your room? Or not, that's fine. Moving on to room 3. So Lisa, Michelle or Simon, does anyone want to share the discussion in the room?
Yes. Lisa, who works in breast cancer research, had as an output fundraising campaigns, and as her longer term goals, they were more to do with research and fundraising, and Michelle's outputs were social justice and the ultimate outcome would be reduced incarceration of youth. And
Right.
for me, the output is higher standards for the PhD program, which have already been achieved, which are being achieved currently, and the outcome is greater dissemination of knowledge and information across the Sydney area and the greater world.
Okay, thank you, Simon. It sounds like you guys had a good discussion in that room, that you're already well on your way to documenting your theory of change. Very productive 10 minutes. Room 2, anyone want to speak from room 2?
I'll kind of give you a couple of things that at least I noted throughout some of the people presenting. I think one of the really good things that was presented was in the outcomes, there were very specific numbers that were provided. And so I think it was Ananya who said, develop 5 products for people on low income or 500 insurance conversations. So it wasn't just, oh, we want to have some conversations or we want to develop some products. It was very specific so that it could then be measured. And so I think that was one of the really good things that I noticed as she was presenting.
Great. Thank you, Kendra. And actually, I think that's a really good point, because I think that is, that's the next step, is around turning your outcomes into indicators that you can measure, and setting KPIs for what you want to achieve. And actually, we'll talk about it at the end, but we're running another session in 4 weeks that will talk a bit more about the next step of the theory of change in terms of developing indicators to measure and report progress against. So that's great, Ananya. Room 1, any feedback?
Yes, I'm the nominated person this time, and there's two of us from Hume Housing in the same group, which is, so we sort of dominated a little and took up most of the time. And the other two were playing around with their outcomes, describing their outcomes, but I didn't write anything down, so I don't remember what they were. But at Hume, we've been working on our outcomes framework. And so we've got a lot of outputs described, but not necessarily concrete numbers attached to them yet. And then we've got a lot of outcomes described as well. But I was just explaining that one of our key outcomes is to sustain tenancies, especially those that are at risk. So they may be some difficulties with the person managing their housing, and so then we provide a service to step in and address whatever the needs are to prevent the housing breaking down. So it would just be the number of people that are provided that service as an output, and the outcome being that the tenancy is sustained. And the flip side of that, which was pointed out by one of the group, is that we're also preventing homelessness, because if someone's evicted from social housing, they're typically going into homelessness. They don't go, oh, let me go and find a private rental instead. So that it has sort of two outcomes, if you like.
Right. It's quite handy you both ended up in the same room, Sally.
I know.
Had a good, productive session. Thank you all for sharing your findings. It sounds like, I think hopefully where you're at now is like a vision of what your sort of second half of theory of change might look like in terms of outputs, outcomes, and impact. And we'll talk a bit in a minute about what to do next. But before we move on, I just wanted to quickly go back to the question that a couple of people raised in the chat box before the breakout. And the question was, or to paraphrase the question, and the question was around what's the difference between purpose and mission and impact? And I love that question. I think it's a great question, because I think, when we're thinking strategy and we're thinking of theory of change, there's so much terminology around. And I think, in the kind of in a purist strategy perspective, each of those things have a different definition. But for me, I don't think it matters what you call it. It's so long as you're covering all the boxes. So for me, if we take each one piece by piece, and kind of in terms of my thinking around the practical application. So for me, I think when I think purpose, I think problem statement and need. So purpose is like, why does your organization exist? i.e., what is the problem that your organization is seeking to achieve? And so I really like this question, because I didn't mention this in today's session, but for me, when I'm doing a theory of change for someone, I often start off in my head with the problem statement, because I think once you've identified the problem, it makes determining the impact of the organization slightly easier, because the purpose is sort of why do we exist? This is a problem we're seeking to address, and hence this is the impact of our organization. This is the change we want to see to address this social problem that we're seeking to serve. Mission for me is very much around what you do and to whom. So kind of translating that into a theory of change, I feel like mission is quite a good descriptor of like the left-hand side in terms of who are our stakeholders, our participants, and what are our activities. So our mission is to do X, Y, Z with this group of people. And then funnily enough, we didn't talk about vision, but vision is often articulated as in our vision is for a world in which such and such happens. Like it's very long term and very ambitious. So I think for me, if anything, impact is most translated to vision in terms of thinking through purpose, mission, vision. Vision is probably longer term and maybe harder to measure, and so impact is kind of bringing that back into slightly more into the tangible sort of 10-year outcome. But vision is about changing the world, impact is about changing the world. So for me, when I think about those three kind of purpose, mission, vision, I think vision is around impact, it's about change. Purpose is around need and problem, and mission is about like more the what are we doing and who are we doing it with. But that is not the textbook answer. That's just about how I think about it in doing my work, and I think that that's probably an important point to convey. So all of these things, you know, strategy documents, theory of change, they need to be fit for purpose for your organization. So if your theory of change makes no sense using your vision as your impact, then just don't do it. You know, do something that works for you. Theory of change is about communicating what you do and helping you to measure it. So, you know, if using purpose helps you to do your theory of change, then use that. So I think take everything that's out there in terms of frameworks and approaches, and then apply them to your organization in a way that makes sense. Don't kind of pull your hair out trying to fit what you're doing against a strict framework, would be my advice. But happy, if I can't remember who asked the question, sorry, it's gone off my chat. Happy to speak more about that if people have got further questions afterwards. But sort of just finishing off, I've got 10 minutes left. I'm just going to share where we're at. So in terms of what next with your theory of change, what do you do? Oh, sorry, hang on. There we go. So the final step in the theory of change is mapping. And that's about taking your activities, putting them into the theory of change, and then you'll have activities, you'll have this mess of outputs and outcomes, and then you'll have impact. So the mapping phase is where you start to physically move things around in your outputs and outcomes, remove duplicates, put things together that go together, and try and develop kind of causal links between activities, outcomes, outputs, impact. So you kind of see the link in the chain of events, and then keep reviewing and refining. And so I think theory of change is a great tool, but it should be a live document. It's not once you've done it, it's done. You know, use it, review it, change it, share it with people, get their input. So we're not going to do this mapping exercise today, but what I would recommend is after today's session, kind of while it's fresh in your mind, you know, jot down your activities on your left-hand side, see if you can refine what you've done in terms of outcomes and outputs, and see if you can develop any kind of causal links between activities and outcomes and impact. So I'm hoping that you've kind of got to the stage where you've got this, you know, the big map with lots of different things on it. And then if you want, the next step after that would be to kind of refine it and have one clear summary page where you can use these headings if they are useful to you, by saying, if we do something by delivering these activities or programs, it will enable us to deliver these deliverables, leading to these changes, enabling this outcome or impact. So it's sad that we don't have time to do this today, but I think this part of this, the mapping piece, it's good to get more people involved, and it's good just to have time to think about it and map it out, like with post-its or with a mirror, because it is a very visual activity. So to kind of finish off, from my perspective, I think the next steps could be for you guys to process your thoughts today, write any more notes while it's fresh in your mind, and then really get it out there, meet with your colleagues, get their input, hold a theory of change workshop, use some of those templates which we will share with you from the front end of this document, from the start of the presentation, to think about which presentation of a theory of change makes sense for our organization. Use our templates or come up with your own. If they don't make sense, then don't worry. I've seen people do theories of change as circles and cycles, so whatever works for you guys. And then start to share your draft theory of change with your stakeholders, get feedback, and then most importantly, you know, continually review it, but also implement it. Which brings me to the next stage. In 4 weeks today, we're running another session on outcomes measurement, which very much builds on today's session. It's about taking your theory of change and actually implementing it in terms of how do you use your theory of change to go away and actually start to identify what it is you're going to measure and how you're going to measure it. So that could be a useful next step as well. And then, I think, Jess, do we have a feedback form that we've got a link to share with people after today's session?
Yeah, I've just popped in the chat.
Okay, perfect, thank you. Yeah, and we'd love your feedback. So I think, you know, part of the hub is practicing what we preach, and so obviously delivering this workshop is part of the RISE program. We want to understand the RISE program has had an impact, and we'd love your feedback on this session, what you gain from it, you know, any changes you'd like to make if it's run in the future. But yeah, we really would love to hear from you. So before I finish off, Rob, is there anything you want to add?
No, just wanted to say thank you everyone for attending and participating and be a part of it. It's great to have you all here, and thanks for joining these sessions. And yeah, as Rachel said, if you can provide your feedback, it takes probably less than a minute. It's a huge help for us because we can just use that input to start, creating the next set of sessions, making sure we're providing as much value to all of you as possible. So no, that's everything from my side. Just like to say thank you again to you, Rachel, for running today's session. And we will have the session in 2 weeks' time is really around picking up on this piece of theory of change and communicating that to stakeholders. So sometimes theory of change can get stuck as an internal document. So that session will be around how do we take that thinking and the great work we've done and start developing a communication piece. So getting it out there for different stakeholders, depending on who you're communicating with. And then, as Rachel said, 2 weeks after that, we'll start diving into outcomes measurement. So how do you take the theory of change, be more intentional around the outcomes that you have within that piece, and then start measuring them with indicators. So we'll look at that. So please keep an eye out for those in your inbox. We'll be shouting out about those workshops in the coming weeks. But aside from that, thank you everyone for joining.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks, everyone. Well, hopefully we'll see you in a few weeks at the outcomes measurement session. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks, everyone, and have a lovely weekend.